Good morning. Here we are again, still remote, but happy to be together. Happy post-Thanksgiving. It was just yesterday. I know you'll see this on Sunday, but we're in the holiday season. Just past Thanksgiving and Christmas is right around the corner. The holiday season. Holiday season often brings up traditions. You know, we all have traditions that we do, our families do. We get together, and yet this year with the pandemic, it's all different. It's all different for many of us, not for everyone, but for many of us. Normally, what happens for me, for my family, is that we have Thanksgiving at either used to be my sister's, and now it's at my niece's house. And I struggled long and hard with the decision whether or not to attend. I ultimately decided not to. With COVID being, surging as it is, hospitals being at or near capacity, it seemed not wise, to going out and doing the things that traditionally I would do. And I'm sure you and your families, you have traditions that you do. Some of them can be hard to let go of, in this time of the pandemic. But it is different. It is very different now. What do we do? We've been in this pandemic now for 9 months, and we're in the holiday season. We have traditions. So what do we do? Do we ignore, the warnings and the guidance and so forth, and go ahead and do our traditions anyway? Throw them out, do pieces of them. How do we do this? How do we navigate our holiday season? How do we handle this tradition? In my family, as I said, we usually get together at my niece's house. I ultimately decided not to do that, and I got together with my son, daughter-in-law, and my daughter-in-law's father. It was just 4. Very nice, small setting. We're all pretty safe in terms of going out, which we don't do. So it felt good, and it was so good to get together. That was very nice. It is a very different experience than my normal Thanksgiving holiday. When I thought about talking about tradition and the holidays, I thought of this movie, Fiddler on the Roof. You might be familiar with it. I love the movie. I love the music to it. If I were a rich man, it's just rich in everything. And so I watched it again because it had been a long time since I'd seen it. I was surprised when I looked at the cover, because I own it and have the DVD. So it's 1971. I had no idea that it was that long ago. Anyway, watched it, and I thought there was a song about tradition, and in fact, yes, there was. It's at the beginning of the movie. And the father is the main character, really the main character in the film, and he's living and telling a story about his family and events that happened in this time frame. At the beginning of the movie, he's talking and singing about tradition and how important tradition is for him and for the people of his village, and that tradition gives them a foundation, just a way of knowing and trusting, this is the way we do things, this is the way things are, and it just keeps a structure and keeps things going the way it's supposed to. He explains some of the traditions, the cap that covers his head. He explains the prayer apron that they wear and what that symbolizes, and how important tradition is for him. So the movie, I watched the whole thing again because I had forgotten so much of it, but the whole movie really is about tradition and breaking tradition. So I thought it was probably pretty appropriate at this point in time. Here we are in the holidays, we have traditions, and yet we're in a pandemic. So if it's been a while since you've seen it, like it was for me, the gist of it is that I think he's got 5 daughters. He and his wife have these daughters. 3 of them are old enough to marry. And the movie is really about the eldest 3 and their marriages. And each time he bounces up against tradition. The eldest daughter, tradition is that the matchmaker, a woman who does this function, she finds matches for families of the daughters' families. And it shows the matchmaker coming to our father's house and telling the mother that she has found a match for their eldest, Seidel, I think the oldest daughter. He's a butcher. He's an older man. Perhaps a little younger than the father, perhaps not. So he's gray-haired, he's a heavy guy, but he's very well-to-do. And so this is considered a good match. The mother's very happy about it. She talks to the father. He goes and talks to the butcher that night. They come to an agreement. And yet, the next day when he tells his daughter, this is what has been arranged, they found a husband for her, and it's the butcher, and she's very unhappy. She has fallen in love with a young man who is a tailor. He's just starting out, so he doesn't have anything yet, but they are in love. So she says no. And the father does, throughout the movie, he's like talking to us, the audience, and it begins, this is the first of a number of times where this happens, then the camera kind of pans way out, and he's there, and he's talking to us, and he says, on the one hand, and on the other hand, so he's processing, he's thinking about the situation that he's faced with, and then the young couple is way far away and frozen in time, so it's kind of like a, frozen time thing. He's going through this on the one hand, on the other hand, and he recognizes that his daughter loves this young man. They have told him that they had exchanged vows last year. He says, you've exchanged vows? And yes, just that they had promised that they would marry each other. So then that's on the one hand. On the other hand, he goes through this whole process, comes to a decision, and comes back into the present time and gives his permission and his blessing to the young couple. And so, of course, they're thrilled. It did not please the mother. It did not please the matchmaker, and it did not please the butcher. And yet, the young people were very, very happy. The second daughter fell in love with a young activist. The whole community was Jewish, and there was a young man who had come into the village. He talked to the father, and the father liked him. Anyway, the young man offered to come and teach the father's children about religion if he wanted, and for room and board. And so the father agreed, and in the teaching and being with his daughters, the second daughter fell in love with the activist, and they fell in love with each other. This time, though, they came together to tell the father, we have fallen in love and we're going to get married. We're not asking your permission, but we are asking for your blessing. Camera zooms back out again, and he goes on the one hand, on the other hand, and eventually comes to a decision and agreement that he's with himself. He's going to break tradition again and give his blessing, which he does. Makes his daughter and her husband, to-be husband, very happy. The third oldest daughter, has come to know a young man in the area, from the area, but he's not Jewish, and they have fallen in love. She goes to her father and says, I have fallen in love with whatever his name was. But this time it's really hard for the father because it's a non-Jewish young man. This is a big deal. His whole, his tradition, his prayer apron, his head, so much is this is really a deep one, and he has a very hard time with it. He does not give his agreement. He, in fact, he stops talking to her. The movie goes on, and toward the end of the movie, because the whole community is Jewish, they are forced by the government to move, to evict, to leave. Father and the mother are packing up their wagon and their belongings and so forth, and the third daughter and her husband are walking along. They come into the yard and she tries again to talk to her father, and he won't speak to her. So she bids goodbye to the mother and her sisters, and the one sister calls out a blessing as the third daughter's walking away. And the father sees it, looks over and sees it, and then he says to the daughter, tell her or say so-and-so, another blessing. So we knew then that the veneer had cracked, that tradition was breaking open because his daughter's love, was most important. So here are these three daughters. 3 times the father, has been faced with a choice. Do I follow tradition or do I not? How does this apply? How do we relate? I mean, lovely movie, wonderful movie. But so what? Well, we are faced with questions now, every day, are we not? We have to choose. How are we going to be in this pandemic, number 1, and in the holiday season, number 2? What are we going to do? In this pandemic, we're being asked all the time, we are to wear masks, we are to stay socially distant from each other, which is not a problem for me, but it is for some. The holidays, though, and the traditions of the holidays bring up all new experiences, emotions, feelings about it. So we get to choose. We have to choose. What are we going to do? Are we going to wear masks? Are we going to with our families? Are we going to travel? How are we going to do this? How are we going to deal with this? Well, I think that we can learn a little bit from our movie father. First of all, you know how it is sometimes when there is something that you've just always done, this is the way it's done, we have to do it this way, and the thought of breaking that or changing that is terrifying. Oh my God, something terrible is going to happen. The father broke the tradition 3 times, and nothing terrible happened. Nothing terrible happened. And in fact, I would go so far to say that some real blessings came out for him, for their families. These 3 daughters were in marriages that were loving, that were solid. They married for love, not for money or standing or any security, any of that kind of thing. So they had good marriages. They were very happy, and the family, the father and his children and the wife too, had honest and authentic relationships. They had conversations about these things and said what was on their heart, and so that's a real blessing. A lot of people don't have that. We always have a choice. You know, sometimes I catch myself saying, I have to. No, I don't have to do anything. We don't have to do anything, but we do have to recognize that every choice has a consequence. So as we are moving through this holiday season in the pandemic, we do have choices to make, and then we want to make the best choices, and we need to be prepared to deal with the consequences, whatever those are. Well, how do we do that? There are three things, really. I think the first thing that we need to look at is we need to recognize that there is always a letting go. In any change, anything that's different, there's always a letting go of something and a gaining of something else. And the letting go could be just of expectation, letting go of the expectation that I'm going to be with my family, you know, in person. It could be letting go of actual presence. You know, there have been a number of events that we just are not able to do. Where for a long while, people who had relatives in nursing homes were not allowed to see them, touch, you know, go in and visit them face to face. Travel, weddings, funerals, lots and lots. You know, we have choices to make, and there are consequences. And so letting go, whether that letting go of that whole event, letting go of the expectation of having it, letting go of whatever that involves. And in the recognition of letting go, there is a sadness, often a grief, which is normal, and we can just know that it's there. There's nothing abnormal about grieving for tradition, unmet tradition. We've all probably had to deal with changes in this pandemic, major changes for some. Some are just holding on tooth and nail because they don't have jobs. One benefit of being older is that I have my retirement. I have Social Security that comes in, and so I am blessed in that isn't a scary thing for me, but it is for a lot of people. We can grieve for the way things were. We can grieve for ways of life, you know, and there are ways of grieving and support for that. So there's the letting go. That's the first thing. Number two, there are often celebrations, even in the midst of letting go and the way things are now. There are new blessings that have emerged. You know, we've all had a lot of extra time, you know, to do things. My major way of social interactions with friends has been, and I've got a couple of friends from high school that I still am in contact with. There are friends from my many years at Bell Telephone, and I usually always maintain that contact with them via lunches. You know, well, there haven't been lunches for a long time, so there are other ways to do that. You know, so the innovative ways that we've come up with, how do we be with each other? I think I mentioned that I didn't do the typical traditional gathering of my whole family, but we did exchange texts and so forth on Thanksgiving, you know, sending love and wishes for happy Thanksgiving, you know, back and forth. So there was a whole flurry of that. And they're still there. They're just a little ways away, just not right here in my space. So the a huge example, I think, is all that we see in terms of how innovative people have been for getting things done. I just watched the Macy's parade, and and it was, no people were there other than the people involved in the parade and then the moderators, but there were no spectators for it. We've had award shows on TV. It is different. It's very different, but we can celebrate that in different ways, and we can celebrate the creativity and the innovation that has occurred. I've done several Unity classes online via Zoom, and people are liking it. It has turned out really better than I would have thought that it was. So that's good. So the loss, the releasing something. There is the celebration of things, and then third, actively looking for new ways of doing things. And new ways of doing new things and new ways of doing them. That's because we don't want to be passive and just float along. By looking for things ways to do them, we've come up with all kinds of things. We can each examine our own. I would challenge each of us really to examine our own gifts, our own talents, and look at ways that we can share them. I see it on Facebook a lot. Many of my musical friends are sharing songs. If you click on something, then you can hear the song. Poetry. I'm reading poetry that they're writing. We are in this together, and we each have unique, wonderful ways of being with people. So we can contribute to humanity as we all go through this experience. And in the doing so, we come out even richer people than we thought we were. Richer in any number of ways that you want to look at it. I think in any time that we are looking at behaving in a different way, something new, what do? A good standard of measurement is always, what would Jesus do? And I can't think of anyone who more exemplifies this notion of breaking tradition, doing what needs to be done, doing it from that centered connection with the divine. He did things very differently. He was, ended up being hated by the Pharisees and, that sort of thing. But he did the right thing, and so we too are here to make different choices, better choices, to expand, to be creative, to make the world a better place for ourselves and our fellow humans. And Jesus would be right there with us, is right there. The Christ presence is right there with us as we do that. So what are we each to do? First of all, it is to align ourselves with that divinity, with that Christ presence that is our source for joy, our source for imagination, our source for creativity, our source for love, wisdom, everything and anything that we need. As we align, we find ourselves having access to just that. And we need to take an active role in our lives. There isn't going to be anybody that comes to my front door, knocks on the door and says, how can I make your life better? That's up to each of us. We're living in a pandemic, but we don't have to just sit passively by waiting for this to be over. We can figure out what we want to do, how we want to do it, and then go out and do it. There are ways that we can do that, and we can help each other. We want to make choices that fully support life and love. Allow those creative juices to flow. How can you probably already examined some ways to do Thanksgiving differently. How can you do Christmas differently? If you're not going to be with your family, could you do a YouTube video to send to them? or to have them look at? Could you do a FaceTime with them? You know, what could you do for Christmas? Be creative, get those juices flowing. And then fourth is give thanks. There is nothing that works better to have a flow established in your life of good, and that is giving thanks and receiving more good. So give thanks in all things. I know I appreciate every day more than I did before this pandemic. I am so grateful for my health. I'm grateful for my family member, each person that is dear to me, each friend, each of you that I haven't seen for a while. I am so grateful that I have all this in my life, all this love. And I'm grateful for each opportunity, each divine idea that floats in there. I like to grab hold of. Fiddler on the Roof ended, it may not look like it was a happy ending, you know, traditionally, but it ended with the whole family, the whole town leaving. They had to exit. But our family that we followed throughout the movie left with rich, deep family relationships, strong love among and between them. They left with, which is, blessings and riches more than a physical home could be. And they left with the knowledge and the understanding of the love that is behind the traditions. And we can have that even if the tradition looks a little different or it changes in some way, we know and understand what that looks like. We can do that. We can move through this pandemic. We will move through this pandemic. And so we are called to keep what we can, to create and innovate and create what we need moving forward. And we know we can do that because we are beloved offspring of the Most High. We are children of God, and in all things are possible in that awareness. So happy holidays, God bless, and thank you.